The British embalming. At 23:20 the fraudulent autopsy was completed, and the body was transferred to St. James Palace at 23:40. Another alleged embalming was then performed on the body until 4 o'clock. Morgan discusses the idea that transferring the body after the autopsy at Fulham to St. James Palace in a hurry during the night was only in order to have a full judicial control over the body. However, this does not seem to be a logical explanation. The situation showed a state of obsession amongst the officials, including Colonel Mather from Buckingham Palace, about quickly transferring the body to St. James at night. There the body was again embalmed in inappropriate circumstances in the Royal Chapel, which was a place that was anything but prepared to embalm corpses. Morgan says that the reason for the fast transfer was to add credibility to the order, that the corpse was to be put under the jurisdiction of Dr. John Burton from the beginning, since St. James Palace was under his control. After the astonishing deceptions we have read about, what motivates us to believe that this embalming in St. James was on Diana? This body was the other woman, as I said in the British autopsy chapter. As the embalming destroys the medical results, then embalming the body again, if it really happened, was an additional work to sabotage any evidence of identity. They had to make sure nothing of the body remained that showed that she was not Diana. We even ask, why should we believe that this was what really happened? It is known that St. James Palace had been hostile to the princess, and the discussions about the autopsy and the rest of the details are unconvincing since the documents have been all manipulated or done improperly. When we also realize that there is no documentation of this embalming at all, can we be certain it took place? And since the mortuary has its own embalming facility, yet they did not use it, it means the goal of transferring the body to St. James was not at all about any embalming. The goal, according to my research, was to hide the body, for it was not Diana's. The British funeral director Clive Leverton said that there was an embalming after the second autopsy in London, despite the difficulty of it, and in spite of the lack of preparation at the location, because it was at St. James Palace. It is strange that this embalming ended at 4 a.m. on the second day, the 1st of September. Here it is also mentioned that the French gave 2 bottles to the British containing embalming fluid supposedly used on the alleged body in France. But why did no traces of the embalming fluid appear in the blood analysis at Charing Cross? I think the answer is crystal clear to you by now. David Green, the man who put Diana in the coffin in France, and the one who embalmed the corpse in London, said that when he received bottles of embalming fluid which was supposed to have been used on the body when it was in France, the bottles were not labeled with any information or anything else. He still does not know exactly what type of liquid was in it. He said he did not know the method of the French embalming. But he has insisted that the embalming, when he saw her in France, was only partial and for presentation purposes. He said that without the issue of displaying the body to Prince Charles and the sisters Sarah and Jane, the corpse would not have to be embalmed, and especially if it was known that there would be a second autopsy in London. Again, he said that the embalming he saw when transferring Diana to the coffin in France was only cosmetic and for the purpose of display, which made him think that she looked very ordinary and not embalmed effectively, and he must embalm her again in London after the autopsy for fear of decomposition before the burial. David Green confirmed that the body was not decomposed at the time in France, and described it by saying fresh body, and confirmed that he had not seen the signs of any decomposition, which would have raised his concern about that issue if it was true. He also stated that he had only been ordered to return Diana very quickly to London without authorizing him as to the subject of autopsy or burial. It means the corpse was completely his responsibility, except when she was taken to the morgue to be autopsied. I ask here, why did she look very normal and fresh after so many hours after death? Is it because she was alive? On the other hand, we read in previous chapters that she was totally melting. Is it because there were 2 bodies? Yes, there were 2 bodies. Green said that the autopsy was finished at 2300 hours or 23:30 at night in the morgue, and then the body was taken to the church in St. James Palace, and it was there that he embalmed it. He confirmed that he did not know about the details of the wounds and the details of the treatment. In addition, he did not have details about the operation that took place in France. Yet strangely enough, he did not record any details of the embalming process, even though he took 5 hours to do it. David Green's testimony here is very interesting and very important, as it's clear that in France he saw Diana, and not the alternative woman. This is what I mean by the occasional introduction of alternative details about the woman. While some described a melted and decomposed woman, this man described her as if she was sound and good, to the point of thinking that it was necessary to embalm her in London. This is an expert who would not miss the signs of decomposition. But Diana was out of his hands, particularly in the morgue, the place where I say that the autopsy which was done was performed on the alternative body and not Diana. At night, after the autopsy, the body was in his hands in order to embalm it, and he said that he had to start without any details and information about the previous stages. Knowing that, David Green is the one who said that the process of embalming an unaffected body takes less time, that is, up to 2 hours, while longer for an affected body. This shows that he saw the princess in France and she looked fine. When the body that was allegedly Diana came to be embalmed under the final process, her condition was much worse, however, which can be concluded from the fact that he took a very long time on the embalming process. I remind you here of the description by Dr. Robert Thompson that the body looked bad when it came to the morgue. If the body was already embalmed in France, then why did he take around 5 hours to finish? This is because the body was really damaged. Of course, this is only true for a situation where we believe that this embalming ever took place. Also, let's not forget that the results of a medical analysis of samples from the body in Charing Cross Hospital proved not simply the absence of alcohol or drugs, but also, in spite of the fact that the body was embalmed in France, a blood analysis never indicated the presence of embalming fluid. This means that it was possible to simply sabotage the pregnancy result with the embalming fluid and stop there. But this was not sufficient for those involved in the abduction scheme, as they switched the samples completely after the British autopsy, which I find was only because the body was not originally Diana's. The whole process was not about hiding a pregnancy, but the body itself. Why did Queen Elizabeth treat Diana like a royal, even though she was no longer officially part of the royal family? After all, it was the Queen herself who removed the title HRH from her. Why the obsession with controlling the body when it was returned to London? John Morgan noted that Diana's described Charles as her enemy, and she wrote about him in the well-known message that mentioned a plan to eliminate her. Morgan wonders why Charles went to fetch the corpse from Paris, and suggests that the reason was in order to polish his image in the media. I suggest that yes, this is true, but the real reason for Charles to break official custom by collecting the body of a woman who was an ex-wife and not part of the royal family, as if she was his wife and royal, was because he was very keen to make it look like the body was Diana's by showing exaggerated levels of intimacy. Queen Elizabeth did not want for Diana to be brought from France the way she was, but Charles did, and persuaded the Queen. This was only so that Diana and the alternative body could be brought under their control, and then the alternative body could be moved smoothly and directly into hands that would hide the truth and keep quiet about its identity. Morgan's argument that the issue was about Charles's image in the media is valid, but if it had been the main objective for the royal family, they would not have acted as coldly in dealing with the news of the incident from the beginning. For example, they would not have dropped Diana's name from the prayers in the church that day as if nothing had happened, while the media were standing just outside the church. And they would not have left the public to mourn alone for 6 days until the funeral was held on September 6, when the Queen and her family refused to cut short their vacation in Scotland. Make a one last show. Since Diana had been harassed all her life by the paparazzi, it was expected of the royals that they would demand privacy for the coffin. Despite this, Prince Charles, when given the proposal of bringing a helicopter to transfer the coffin from the hospital to the airport, did not just refuse this, but demanded that the coffin leave via the main entrance in front of the public and the paparazzi. This was one of the first orders he had given, while still in Scotland, when he told the hospital about this wish. He said, "People want to see her and they should." It was the same thing with regards to the royal ceremony in London. If it had not been for the insistence of the Prime Minister at the time, Tony Blair, and Charles, the Queen would never have cut her vacation short in Balmoral even through the catastrophe. And she did not consent to Charles traveling to Paris to bring back the body. Also, Buckingham Palace refrained from flying the flag at half-mast, which is a sign of the death of a royal figure. The Queen didn't even want to give Diana a big funeral, and once again she stated that Diana was not eligible for national or royal burial ceremonies. But Camilla played an important role by insisting that Charles asked the Queen to waive formalities because otherwise the monarchy would fall. Why did the Queen have so many issues about protocol when dealing with the death of Diana? Could the reasons have been that Diana was divorced from Charles, or that she had lost the title HRH? But the Queen knew that Diana was still the Princess of Wales. Besides, she would not miss the fact that Princess Diana enjoyed the rights of being the Queen Mother of the future King William. Also, no one would believe the excuse that after the divorce Diana returned to be a woman from the public, and therefore her body should be treated in that way. The Queen and her family are not only very committed to the protocols, but they consider breaking them as personally degrading. If we believe the claim that Diana was no longer royalty, then why did the royal family break all protocol, and most notably Charles, who in spite of the fact that he was known to be respectful of his mother and never opposed her, went against her wishes in this matter? Somebody broke protocol, and it was either the Queen or Crown Prince Charles. And from the history of these two people, we understand that Charles is more likely to have broken with formalities for his personal interests, or for any other benefit like the divorce, for instance. His personality is opposite that of his mother's, who would not break protocol only because of feelings of hatred towards her daughter-in-law. That explains the behavior of Charles and the Prime Minister at the time, Tony Blair, and everybody in power in Britain, forcing the Queen to break protocol as Charles told her, "We must show the respect that she deserved, otherwise we will all regret not showing it." Was the real reason for the Queen's unconcerned behavior that she knew the body was of another woman? The Queen actually wanted to follow protocol because she knew that the funeral was not Diana's funeral at all. The Queen would not want to make a royal funeral for a non-royal and unknown woman. She would not lower the flag at half-mast for her. She would not disturb her vacation at Balmoral for her. But after being convinced that her throne was at risk, where the more she followed protocol the more the public became angry, she consented. The reason the Queen lowered her head and bowed in front of the casket when it passed her on the streets of London was because she knew she was not bowing to her hated daughter-in-law, but to save her own throne.